So what does it sound like when an economy starts to crack? On Long Island, it sounds like this: silence. It's the silence of thousands of construction jobs that have vanished. Recent downturns have seen the New York metro area shed tens of thousands of these jobs, with a significant number of them on Long Island. And this isn't just a number from a government report, it's a 5 alarm fire from one of America's most iconic suburbs. So how did a place known for its wealth and stability find itself in the middle of a major construction downturn? And more importantly, why is what's happening here a chilling preview of what could happen in your community next? The answer is a perfect storm of economic forces, political inaction, and a housing crisis that's been decades in the making. And it's a warning to everyone. So let's talk about this. The local story is it's a perfect storm on the island. To really get what's happening on Long Island, you have to look at the 3 crushing waves hitting its economy all at once: the cost to build, the cost to borrow, and the cost of delay. So first, the cost to build. Everything is more expensive. While the global supply chain disruptions that started a few years ago have mostly stabilized, prices for some materials are still very volatile, and costs are now being driven by labor shortages and local bottlenecks. And it's not just materials. According to annual surveys of Long Island business leaders, like those conducted by firms such as PFK O'Connor, a top concern is the sheer cost of doing business. This is where the second wave hits: the cost to borrow. The era of cheap money is over. For the construction industry, which runs on credit, today's higher interest rates are a major problem. Every percentage point increase makes a new housing development or critical infrastructure project drastically more expensive. Developers who rely on loans to get through long building cycles are finding that the numbers just don't add up anymore. Projects that looked profitable on a spreadsheet 2 years ago are now being put on hold indefinitely. And that leads to the third and maybe the most infamous wave: the cost of delay. Long Island is a notoriously complex place to build. For years, critics have pointed to the region's web of zoning regulations as a massive barrier to development. Some analysis, including one from the Long Island Zoning Atlas Project, have found that nearly 89% of buildable residential land in Nassau and Suffolk counties, the only thing that you're allowed to construct is a single family home. And when it comes to multifamily housing, the kind that's desperately needed, some studies show it's prohibited on over 90% of residential land in parts of the island. So this isn't just about rules on a page. It's about a years-long maze of approvals, permits, community hearings that can kill a project before a single shovel hits the ground. And some towns have been trying to revise their zoning codes, but this has often meant adding more requirements like special use permits, which just add more time and more uncertainty. And when you combine soaring costs, expensive loans, and a regulatory system that seems designed for delays, you get the exact situation we have now: a construction industry in a significant downturn. So now let's talk about the human impact. Okay, so let's go beyond the statistics. A job loss number is an abstract thing, but the loss of a paycheck, a career, or a sense of purpose, that is painfully real. And when thousands of construction jobs disappear, it doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It sends shockwaves across entire communities. So imagine you're a 45-year-old electrician. You spent 2 decades in the trade, building the schools, the hospitals, and homes of Long Island. It's a good middle-class career that has let you raise a family in the same place that you grew up. But now the phone isn't ringing. The big projects are stalled. The small contractor you work for is struggling to find jobs. And for the first time in your life, you're worried. This isn't a hypothetical. It's the reality for thousands of skilled tradespeople, and it feeds a vicious cycle. The high cost of living on Long Island has been pushing young people and families away for years. Now a lack of steady work is threatening to drive out the very people that we need to build our way out of this crisis. And recent surveys of Long Island businesses show that retaining young talent and finding quality workers are major concerns, problems that are made worse by the lack of affordable housing. And if a skilled carpenter or plumber can't afford to live on Long Island and now can't even find a consistent work there, where do they go? They leave and they take their skills with them. The ripple effect doesn't stop there. It hits the local hardware store that sees fewer orders. It hits the diner near a stalled construction site that loses its lunchtime rush. It hits the recent graduate saddled with student loans who sees that the dream of owning a home anywhere near where they grew up is becoming just about impossible. Median home prices in Nassau and Suffolk counties have climbed relentlessly, fueled by a chronic lack of new housing. So this is the human cost. It's the erosion of the middle class, the hollowing out of the workforce, and the quiet despair of a generation that feels locked out of the future their parents took for granted. The warning isn't just about jobs, it's about the very social fabric of the community. So we're digging into a very, very complex issue, and we want to know what you think. Is the biggest problem the economic pressure from interest rates, or is it the local zoning and regulations? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're finding this analysis valuable, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps me to continue to make deep dive videos like this one. Now, back to the story. So the warning to everybody, okay, the canary in the coal mine, it's tempting to write this off as just a Long Island problem, a wealthy, high-cost suburb facing its own unique challenges, but that would be a huge mistake. What's happening on Long Island isn't an isolated event. It's a test case for a pattern that is emerging in affluent, built-out suburban communities all across the country. So think about it. The core ingredients of this crisis are not unique to New York. High housing costs that outpace wages, that's a national story. A retiring generation of skilled tradespeople with not enough new workers to replace them. The Home Builders Institute estimates the nation needs to hire around 723,000 new construction workers every year just to keep pace with demand. A tangled web of local regulations that makes it hard to build anything other than expensive single-family homes. That's the default setting for countless American suburbs. Long Island is simply at the extreme end of the spectrum. It's what happens when all these pressures are concentrated in one place and then supercharged by a sudden economic shock, like a rapid rise in interest rates. The very things that made places like this desirable, good schools, established neighborhoods, local control, have over time created a kind of economic paralysis. The system has become so rigid that it can no longer adapt. One staggering estimate from the Regional Plan Association suggests that to meet demand from population growth and other factors, Long Island needs to build over 250,000 new homes by 2040. But under current zoning, it only has the capacity to build about a third of that. So this isn't a gap, it's a big problem. And it's a big problem that other regions are staring into, whether they realize it or not. So the warning from Long Island is that you can't achieve community stability by freezing the community in time. Without the ability to build, adapt, and grow, an economy becomes brittle. And when the next economic storm hits, it doesn't just bend, it's something that breaks. So is there a way out of this? If this is a warning, what's the solution? The answer is as complex as the problem itself. There's no single magic bullet, but a path forward is starting to slowly emerge, centered around a difficult and often uncomfortable conversation. So at the state level, we've seen ambitious attempts to tackle the crisis. In 2023, Governor Kathy Hochul proposed the New York Housing Compact, which is a bold plan that aimed to create 800,000 new homes over a decade. The centerpiece of the plan would have required communities to hit housing growth targets and allow more development around transit hubs. But the proposal was met with fierce resistance from suburban leaders who called it an attack on local control. And the core mandates were ultimately dropped. And that failure was a very, very powerful lesson. Top-down mandates are a tough sell in places that cherish their independence. The state has since pivoted to a more incentive-based approach, offering funding to communities that voluntarily change their zoning to encourage housing growth. Governor Hochul's administration is also in the middle of a 5-year housing plan that brings together various state programs aiming to create or preserve 100,000 affordable homes. But the real battle is, and it always will be, at the local level. It's happening in town hall meetings and zoning board hearings across the island. Some communities are starting to act. You're seeing places like Patchogue and Islip have seen successes, sometimes with changes going back to more than a decade, by using zoning districts to encourage denser transit-oriented development in their downtowns. They realized that to revitalize their commercial centers, they needed more people living there. And the broader solution probably lies in a mix of these approaches. It requires state and federal governments to help fund the massive infrastructure updates, especially for sewers and transportation that are needed to support new housing. It requires tackling the severe shortage of skilled labor through better vocational training and making it possible for those workers to actually afford to live in the communities that they are building. And most of all, it requires a bit of fundamental shift in mindset. For the decades, the conversation about development on Long Island has been driven by a fear of change. But the danger, as the current downturn shows, isn't a change, it's the inability to change. So the loss of thousands of construction jobs on Long Island isn't just a local headline, it's a symptom of a deeper illness affecting the American suburb. It reveals a system where the cost of regulation, the shortage of labor, and a deep resistance to new housing have created an economy that is fundamentally unstable. So what's happening here shows that when you make it nearly impossible to build, you don't just stop a few apartment complexes, you choke off the economic lifeblood of your community. You drive out young people, you strain the middle class, and you make the entire region more vulnerable to the next economic downturn. So the path out isn't easy. It involves tough choices about zoning, infrastructure, and what we want our communities to look like in the 21st century. But the story of Long Island serves as a critical warning. The loudest sound in an economy isn't the roar of growth, it's the silence that follows when building stops. And that's a sound that no community can afford to ignore.